All right, I wanted to do a video responding to a video response that someone posted to the video that I did talking about Richard Dawkins' child abuse and Columbine High School and natural selection and things like that. This is by a guy, Peter Thurston, I guess is his name. He's got a channel called Essence of Thought. Evidently is a secular humanist of some kind. But I'm going to go ahead and play a little bit of this. I might not respond to all of it, as it started getting pretty wacky after just a few minutes.
Says the person who asserts that teaching the factual origins of all known life on Earth amounts to child abuse, whilst asserting that we should instead teach children that they will be tortured for eternity if they disobey or even think critically about the Bible.
And so what I've taught my children is that the fear of Yahweh, Proverbs 1:7, is the beginning of knowledge.
If you're going to try opening by poisoning the well, then you better be damn well sure you have some sort of leg to stand on at the very least. Now, I've put out 2 videos in response to mine, so we should get right down to business.
So anyway, let's go ahead and listen. So you're going to get to hear me and then hear this fellow who sounds British to respond. So here we go.
You failing to link any other videos in your description and the title of your videos not being very much help.
I'm so terribly sorry. The smugness with which this guy speaks is really distracting to me.
Actually, it's cool taking the accusations of abuse very seriously. I'm not smug. I'm merely rather blunt and methodological, as can be seen from my detailed referencing, not to mention British. But I do see the greater hypocrisy presented in a person pulling such faces as these and laughing, whilst claiming their opponent is smug, as if that wins said person brownie points. It doesn't. So how about we get back to the matters important to this conversation, the one we are having right now.
I have experienced both domestic violence and sexual abuse.
As much as I'm sorry that happened to you, that's called a red herring. That's completely irrelevant to what you're pretending to be critiquing.
How is that a piece of information designed to act as a distraction during a debate? I was merely using my introduction to note the fact that I have first-hand experience of both domestic and sexual abuse, and therefore I have experience in recognizing what such abuse looks like. I was noting this in a conversation in which you were claiming that threatening your children with eternal violence was not abuse, whilst teaching them scientifically verifiable facts was abuse. Here is how you first laid out your position in your video whilst discussing Columbine.
If you teach children from the very youngest age that they are rearranged pond scum, not created in the image of God, that we acquired our characteristics through the process of natural selection, that we are not any different from animals. In fact, that's all we are animals with bigger, higher functioning brains. Should it surprise us when children are abused to believe lies like that they act like animals?
Therefore, it is entirely relevant to the main topic of conversation. Ergo, it could not be a red herring. At most, it could be said to be an argument from authority, yet I wasn't declaring myself right because I had said experience. I was merely noting the fact that I would give no quarter in my arguments, for this is a topic I have personally suffered at. Do you want to know the real red herring? Asserting a red herring exists where there is none to distract from my actual point. Who do that?
So do know that if you attempt to pull a theological fast one, I'll nail your hand to the nearest wall, metaphorically speaking.
Sorry. The arrogance and smugness of this guy is a little distracting.
Of course. Now, since you have disabled comments on your video, I feel like
the main reason I had to disable comments is to keep profanity from being posted on it by atheists, and also by Roman Catholics and by Eastern Orthodox people too. Evidently, self-control is not real high on the list of virtues. But then again, if you have no basis for the concept of virtue, it does make some sense.
I'll have to attempt to get this video to you by other means. But with that noted, let us begin.
And, sir, that's why I put my email address on my channel, so people could do that, okay?
Yes, but it allows you to bury those conversations you failed in, which I take to be the vast majority, if not all, due to the poor capabilities as demonstrated in your original video. Truth be told, I actually note this so my subscribers know and therefore don't bother to check your original video for purposes of commenting, sending you traffic you do not deserve whatsoever. Were your comments open, there may have actually been a point, but since they're not, that's all a little redundant.
So what? They also utilise firearms. Do we therefore discard the ballistics as a field in science?
That is a red herring, and I think you know it is. Totally irrelevant to everything I'm saying, and has nothing to do with the concept that is before us. Do we therefore discredit the science of ballistics? My point that you've missed, and I haven't watched, I mean, your video is 48 minutes long, and I haven't decided if I'm going to even watch all of it yet, because it's very shallow and very bad as a response. The point being, you need to show how it's inconsistent with the atheistic worldview that they held to, that they did what they did. I mean, Eric Harris, in the documentaries that I've watched and what I've read about Columbine High School, says repeatedly, we're going to take natural selection up a few notches. I would ask you as a humanist, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with that? Don't do the red herring stuff. Or you think we should discard the science of ballistics. What does that have to do with anything I'm saying? Nothing. And this is what I see constantly from atheists. You will not deal with the argument. Instead, you want to obfuscate and create red herrings and try to stir emotion instead of dealing with the tough questions that the fact is atheists before you were willing to address, men like Bertrand Russell and many others who knew that these are the key questions that need to be answered, the questions you are avoiding.
Science is amoral. It doesn't...
That's very true. Science is amoral. And that you study the operational way in which things work. Science has nothing to do with what we're talking about. I'm talking about natural selection and the evolutionary worldview that goes with it. That's what I'm talking about. How did you get onto the topic of, well, science is amoral? What does that have to do with what I'm saying? Nothing. Nothing.
So you've now presented a second argument which is completely different to the original one I showed merely a few minutes ago, which argued that teaching evolutionary science was child abuse, and said abuse led to the Columbine shooting.
If you teach children from the very youngest age that they are rearranged pond scum, not created in the image of God, that we acquired our characteristics through the process of natural selection, that we are not any different from animals. In fact, that's all we are animals with bigger, higher functioning brains. Should it surprise us when children are abused to believe lies like that they act like animals?
This has now become the demand that I, the atheist / person who is scientifically literate, must demonstrate how an amoral field of science is at odds with what happened. Now, it could be said to be the same area of argument, but it's at least watered down, if nothing else. Fact is, in doing this, you are carrying out the very thing you just accused me of, and I shall demonstrate that fact. But to do so, we must see what I stated next, which was key to my entire argument and your response.
But that wasn't the science at fault.
That's called dodging the question. You need to answer how what they did is not consistent with holding to an evolutionary worldview where, hey, look, we're just matter in motion. We're just atoms banging around. And what difference does it make if some atoms get together and put atoms in their hands and blow up other people? What's the difference? What does it matter? That's the question you know you're avoiding and you're not wanting to answer.
Wrong. You are simply lying when you talk about the evolutionary worldview as something beyond the observable science. This is a complete fabrication, and if you believe otherwise, then please prove your claim that children are being taught evolution via natural selection as the basis for one's morals and actions. The reality, meanwhile, is that, as I've noted, evolutionary science as taught in schools is purely amoral. And I do mean amoral as opposed to morally ambiguous. I believe you have confused the two, leading to you failing to understand my point. Evolution being amoral means that it has no relation to morality and ethics whatsoever. Not that it's morally neutral, but that it has no connection. Period. So to demand we give you a moral code based on the observed facts of evolution is as asinine as demanding we give you a moral code based on the observed facts of ballistics, as relates to the case, and yet I could replace it with anything. You may as well be asking me to demonstrate how their actions were inconsistent with the facts that pure water at sea level freezes below zero, as that's about as much sense as you are making. If you truly wanted to understand secular ethics, you could perhaps study secular ethics. Just a thought. It's something I am most certainly not afraid to discuss, however, as seen in this clip from my original response, following me highlighting the facts that your God orders genocide. And how can you say that Hitler's actions were different from all this? He, like Moses, sought a promised land in wiping out what they saw as a diseased thread of humankind. As for me, I don't base what is right and wrong on the orders of a genocidal being, which has yet to be proven to exist. Instead, I lay out, rather simply, that I value human well-being. I uphold bodily autonomy, which is intrinsic to the rights of consent, as well as other human rights which have been explored and developed by the philosophy of ethics. As a result, I, as a secular humanist, get to disagree with genocide, whilst you get no such respite as a self-reported Christian. And I know what's coming next. You're going to assert that your morality, which undoubtedly calls for genocide, is superior on the basis that you give it some label or another like objective, universal, divine. Meanwhile, I'm here telling you I don't give a damn about what my morality is called. I care about what it says. If we both agree that human well-being is moral, then the Holocaust was objectively reprehensible, and the Nuremberg trials were objectively part of handling that. If you don't agree that human well-being is moral, then don't expect me to turn my back on you with a room full of knives. Fact is, if you want to assert that accepting evolutionary science results in a rather nihilistic perspective, demonstrate that. I know you won't be able to, as, once again, it's completely amoral. It's not lacking on morality. It wasn't designed to touch upon morality. All this violence and aggression is solely coming from you, nowhere else. On the other hand, I can show that according to your Bible, your God not only carries out acts of genocide, but also orders genocide, mass rape, and slavery repeatedly as divinely moral actions. But throughout each of these clips where you changed your original argument, as demonstrated, you've also thrown out a number of wild assertions which are completely unsubstantiated. For example, we have the assertion that not only is there an evolutionary worldview beyond that of a amoral scientific theory being taught in schools, but also an atheistic worldview. No, atheists merely share the common lack of belief in a deity. From there is no worldview to talk of beyond what an individual atheist subscribes to. Secular humanist. See the clip before where I explained my own values.
It was them. Science only tells us what is, not how things should be.
Quite true. And that's also irrelevant.
For that we turn to the environment.
Yeah, so when I listened to the first few minutes of this, for what's right or wrong, we turn to the environment. Listen to the contradictions in this man's thinking.
This is only a contradiction brought about by sloppy cutting on your part. When I insert my rebuttals, I make sure the person has made their solid point worth tackling. I don't merely cut in mid-sentence and take the last few words out of context. Let us hear the full segment without the tears of such a man-child. Now, they, the people who did this atrocity, may have attached to a poor understanding of some principle they'd once heard as a justification for their actions, but that wasn't the science at fault. It was them. Science only tells us what is, not how things should be. For that we turn to the environment. Now, since both the killers committed suicide, we can only go on what they left behind, as well as what the others around them observed. For example, interviews with the friends found there to be a long history of bullying and ostracization, going so far to refer to them as the losers of losers. On top of this, analysis of their journals found that contrary to how they were treated, they viewed themselves as godlike beings who were owed everything by society. Their profiles began to match that of many terrorists or serial killers who adopt this mentality that they are somehow divinely ordained in some fashion to scar the lives of their victims and their victims' families in such a way that they will likely never be forgotten. So the context of the phrase, "for that we turn to the environment," is not a discussion about how we go about figuring out what is moral and what is not. It was me discussing the causes which led to the Columbine shooting, since it could not have been the amoral science being accused, as was shown in the clip from your original video, which declared evolutionary science not only abuse, but abuse that caused Columbine. May we have a quick recap?
If you teach children from the very youngest age that they are rearranged pond scum, not created in the image of God, that we acquired our characteristics through the process of natural selection, that we are not any different from animals. In fact, that's all we are animals with bigger, higher functioning brains. Should it surprise us when children are abused to believe lies like that they act like animals?
That's why it's relevant. We were talking about the supposed causes of Columbine, which is why I then led on to discuss what was left behind and figuring out why they did what they did. To deal with your accusations that teaching evolution was the cause for the Columbine shooting, bringing up both the bullying and the shooter's God complexes.
He says, science can only tell us what is, not what ought. That's very true. David Hume said the same thing. You cannot get an ought from an is. So where do we turn for ethics? The environment. But wait a minute, the environment is only what is. How do you get an ought from an is if you're a secular humanist? You can't, and you're not going to hear a rational foundation for that forthcoming from Peter Thurston.
Well, I have already supplied evidence that I did in fact tackle just that. Not because I had to, since you failed to demonstrate a link between either evolution or being atheist and being a mass murderer, but because I believe in quality behind what I say, as opposed to simply vitriolic moaning and accusations of red herring with no further clarification. Thing is, I thank you in agreeing with me that an is can never give us an ought. You have completely destroyed your own position. i.e. the position that somehow the existence, aka is, of a god can act as the basis for an ought. You have just admitted that your proposed divine pixie dust is merely more snake oil and has no effect in elevating one set of morals above another. And yet, through biblical theology, we see that the Bible allows for genocide, mass rape, slavery, and torture. So if you feel any of these things are wrong, which I take to be the case from how you view Columbine, which is perfectly at peace with the declared biblical perspective, then well done. You yourself have already partaken in some form of secular philosophy surrounding ethics, whether you wish to admit that fact or not.
Losers.
That was Brooks Brown, who was friends with both of them, who's been interviewed many times about what happened at Columbine. Plus, if you look at their journals, while Eric Harris is a budding sociopath, Dylan Klebold is a little different from that. He, longed for love and really wanted to have friends and didn't have many. And yeah, they were subjected to a lot of humiliation. But again, all of this sidesteps the issue that is before us. How is it inconsistent with believing in natural selection? That's the only point I've made so far. And this guy has completely missed it. And he is not even willing to try to touch that issue. And again, I've interacted with a lot of atheists over the years, and this is just the way it is. They can't offer an argument to justify what they're saying. He just says, well, it's a bad understanding of that. No, it's not. It is perfectly consistent. Think about the reign of terror that has happened in atheistic, communistic regimes in the 20th century. Think about what happened under Lenin, Stalin, Pol Pot, Mao Zedong, Ho Chi Minh, and all the rest of them. They were being perfectly consistent with their atheistic worldview and just trying to push forward the progress of our evolution. How is what they did inconsistent with the belief in natural selection? How is the science of eugenics inconsistent with natural selection, with evolution? Again, you're moving away from the debate into other matters that aren't even relevant to the point that I was making.
Their understanding was as bad as yours, in that it viewed an amoral field of science as something else entirely. But please, keep on projecting your dishonest nature as demonstrated through video evidence taken from your very first video that declares evolution doesn't merely allow for what happened at Columbine, but was actually the abuse which caused Columbine, and what you say here. From this, your original argument discussing said origins, my response makes perfect sense to all but the willfully ignorant. As for the dictator role, how is what they did inconsistent with the teaching of gravity? All they did by dropping bombs was help stuff fall. There is no atheistic worldview any more than a single theistic worldview. I have nothing to do with those people whatsoever. I'm a secular humanist and grassroots at that. Also note that Stalin utilized the Russian Orthodox Church to morally justify his atrocities. That's why he reformed it whilst turning himself into a divine entity rather than destroy it. The same is true of every other monster you just listed. They all used religion simply in a form we in the West are not so familiar with these days. They deify themselves in a similar fashion to medieval Christianity surrounding kings who were thought to heal upon touch thanks to the grace of God, the pharaohs of Egypt who were thought to make the river flood, and the emperors of various nations from Rome to the Far East who were seen as their ancestors incarnate. These leaders even come with miracles attached. Now you may say that many didn't declare what they practiced as a religion, to which I point out there are Christians who do the same today.
Their profiles began to...
So what? From your perspective, So what? I, as a Christian, I have a moral foundation. I can say, yeah, they were very immoral, very evil, very wicked, and that they had no regard for the lives of other people, and were willing to, for just completely randomly, take them and try to ruin as many of them as they could. That's evil. That's immoral. I can understand why I would say that. I can understand why I would say that. I don't understand why you would, though. I don't understand why you think that's wrong, from your perspective.
Never be forgotten.
And Peter, I have a reason to say, yeah, and they're evil for doing that, for having a godlike complex and for thinking that everyone in the world owed them something and that they were above everyone around them. I have a foundation to make that moral assessment. You don't. You don't. And I maintain that in doing so, you're abandoning your worldview and embracing mine. Anytime you denounce anything as evil and use that word in an absolute sense, you have abandoned your worldview and are borrowing mine. And of course, I know why you do that. Because you are made in the image of God, and you do know the God I'm talking about, even though you've convinced yourself that he doesn't exist.
Every living thing that moved on land perished. Birds, livestock, wild animals, and all creatures that swarm over the earth, and all mankind. Everything on dry land that had the breath of life in its nostrils died. Every living thing on the face of the earth was wiped out. People and animals and the creatures that move along the ground and the birds were wiped from the earth. Only Noah was left and those with him on the ark. Genesis chapter 7 verse 21 through 23. God murders everything, including everyone on earth, as divine justice. At midnight the Lord struck down all the firstborn in Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on the throne, to the firstborn of the prisoner who was in the dungeon, and the firstborn of all the livestock as well. God massacres all the firstborns of Egypt, including the babes of the crib born to newly made parents. God wished to scar the Egyptians so that they never forget, just like we see with the shooters at Columbine. The Lord said to Moses, "Take vengeance on the Midianites for the Israelites. After that, you will be gathered to your people." So Moses said to the people, "Arm some of your men to go to war against the Midianites so that they may carry out the Lord's vengeance on them. Send into battle 1,000 men from each of the tribes of Israel." So 12,000 men armed for battle, 1,000 from each tribe, were supplied from the clans of Israel. Moses sent them into battle, 1,000 from each tribe, along with Phinehas' son Eleazar, the priest, who took with him articles from the sanctuary and the trumpets for signalling. They fought against Midian as the Lord commanded Moses and killed every man. Among their victims were Evi, Rechem, Zur, Hur, and Reba, the 5 kings of Midian. They also killed Balaam, son of Beor, with the sword. Numbers chapter 31, verse 1 through 8. The genocide of the Midianites followed shortly after by the conquest rape of the remaining women. Do not suppose that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be the members of his own household. Jesus Christ in Matthew chapter 10, verses 34 through 36. And I am just sick and tired of the lies, all of them. You pretend to have some greater sense of morality than me while supporting a proposed God who is defined by their lust for genocide, mass rape, and slavery, not forgetting the more recent addition of eternal torture, which you threaten your children with. You don't have the ability you believe you do from a Christian standpoint, whilst I, a secular humanist, have that capability in an honest and open manner. I get to question these things. You don't.
So keep that godlike view of themselves in mind with what this person's about to say, because I think it will contradict what they're about to go on to.
Peter, you couldn't possibly have more badly missed the point. You could not possibly have more badly missed the point. The fact is, in America, evolution is taught in the public schools as a fact. That's what I was taught. I was taught in 6th grade science that life began in a little warm pond by accident. I had to write that on a test. I was taught that I am an African ape, that I am an evolved African ape, Australopithecus. I am an ape. You are an ape. Our great-grandparents were ape-like creatures, that we literally are animals, that we are no different from animals. And so, again, he says it's going to contradict this. No, you just completely sidestepped the argument that I made, the point I'm trying to make, and actually didn't even listen to enough of what I was saying to even get the argument.
The projection on your part is crippling at this point. You have demonstrably lied about my work. You have demonstrably lied about what your original argument was, and in doing so, you have tried to claim that what I have said is irrelevant because the answer to your original accusations does not work to the same extent it did for your new ones. This is even though the main point offered at the very start of my argument does manage to break the core demand you are making in how you're stupid enough to demand moral answers from an amoral field. That is on you.
So let's talk about child abuse. If you teach children from the very youngest age that they are rearranged pond scum, not created in the image of God, that we acquired our characteristics through the process of natural selection, that we are not any different from animals. In fact, that's all we are animals with bigger, higher functioning brains. Should it surprise us when children are abused to believe lies like that they act like animals?
Can you possibly tell me which other social species has a habit of massacring their social group? Because you say this is an animalistic behavior.
It is. Alligators eat their young all the time. Hamsters, gerbils, rabbits do it all the time. Gorillas and various kinds of monkeys regularly massacre, slaughter, and eat each other.
Very good. You've actually supplied something new, which is worth discussing. So let's take a look at the examples of social animals which routinely act out atrocities among their own social groups you have presented. But perhaps we should first define what a social species is before we continue. A social species is not one which lives in family groups before dispersing into a preferably solitary life. No, a social species is one in which the individual belongs to a group of animals of the same species beyond a genetic unit, aka parents and their offspring. Now, the individual interacts with other members of the same social group more extensively than outsiders of the same species. A social species is not merely reference to a load of the same organisms in the same area, else bacterium would also be a social species. So in starting we have alligators, which are primarily solitary animals which claim territories whenever possible. It's true, smaller animals unable to secure territory are more likely to cluster together, yet this is not a preferred state and there is no social interaction as such or group to speak of. Next we have hamsters, which again are solitary, and it is in fact this fact which is responsible for the most hamster deaths in captivity, where they are kept in groups which cause immense amounts of stress for the animal. One animal breaks and kills the other animals. This stress also explains said infanticide. There are some better-natured individuals and some species which are less risky, but these are irregular. Next on the list are rabbits. Finally, a social species which lives in colonies. Yet the maternal infanticide you are mentioning is, once again, the result of stress and/or failure to develop parental instincts. So and atypical behaviour. The same is even true of wild rabbits, yet in these cases the infanticide is typically carried out by other mothers, killing due to a lack of nesting chambers or social instability. But you are correct in that this is a low-end social species which does conduct atrocities. Lastly, we have gorillas, where infanticide within a social group is near non-existent. Instead, infanticide is almost always carried out by an outsider male. However, you are correct. There are social animals which take part in regular infanticide, and one of those is pan-troglodytes, aka the common chimpanzee, something you posted in the comments of my video response, demonstrating just how useful said comments are to convey information. And had I taken a while to think about what I'd said, I'd likely worded it very different. But as it stands, I was wrong, and I can fully admit that fact. Upon reflection, I can see why I said what I said, and that was the immense irritation at the clear confirmation bias on your part. Yes, nature can be brutal, and infanticide can be said to be part of animal behaviour. But do you know what else can also be said to be animal behaviour? How about peace, parental care, and outright altruism? Keeping it on chimpanzees, if we move away from the common chimpanzee to the pygmy chimpanzee, aka the bonobo, we see a drastic change in social structure. Now, whilst bonobos are not perfect, numerous studies have demonstrated a far more peaceful existence brought about by moving away from the violent patriarchal groups which maintain control through violence itself and the fear of violence. And while certain species of alligators have been known to cannibalize, other crocodilians will defend the offspring of other crocodiles to the death. And some species, like the spectacled caiman, form creches where females take turns guarding one another's offspring. Rats, meanwhile, will forsake food to rescue other rats even if they're denied social interaction afterwards, meaning that there's no social reward for their actions. Simply pure altruism. You claim any negative attribute of humankind is animalistic, whilst ignoring the fact that we can also observe peace, love, and altruism in the animal kingdom. So when you attempt to use the word animal as an intrinsic insult, all I should do is ask you, which animal are you talking about? Variety exists in nature, just as in people. And we, as you noted, have higher cognitive abilities, which can develop secular philosophies to help one another thrive in this world. Because it's the only one we have in this one short life.
And again, you're totally missing the point of the argument. You're trying to drill into minutia and are sidestepping the main force of what I'm saying.
Yeah, already addressed this point repeatedly.
All you've said so far is, well, to find out what's right and wrong, we have to look to our environment. But you haven't really expanded on that yet.
That's because I never said that. I said to understand why these people did what they did, we must look at the environment, after you clearly asserted that the teaching of evolution was responsible.
Because, that's how the defendants at the Nuremberg trials defended the Nazis. Hey, who are you guys here in the West to come and superimpose your values with guns and tanks and airplanes on us?
Where do you think Germany is in the world? Also, I dealt with this earlier.
The German Supreme Court said that Jews are not people. They're not even human beings. So, who are you to enforce your morals on them?
Well, they were factually wrong. But like you, they wished to ban science from public schools.
But either way...
No one's arguing that Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris were rational, okay? No one's saying that. The point is, they were not honed in by any kind of moral compass because of the worldview they embraced. And that's the point you're missing.
No. The point is that you can't comprehend the basic fact that an amoral field of science is not an ethical worldview, and for you to assert otherwise is a blatant lie.
Downright dishonest and manipulative.
Oh, dishonest and manipulative!
You have no evidence whatsoever for what you are saying beyond a single t-shirt saying natural selection.
No, you also have the memorabilia that was left behind. Eric Harris talks constantly about genocide, about killing mankind, about how natural selection is the greatest thing in the whole world because it kills off all those blankety-blank weaklings. Haven't you ever read Eric Harris's journal? If you're going to sit here and claim to comment on it, I think you should know something about it.
Says the pastor whose own book repeatedly forwards genocide. I've gone over the evidence of the journals as well as the extensive profiles built thereafter, and noted how specialists have interpreted that. If you want to be an ass, then by all means go ahead and be an ass, but don't try to drag me into it.
Note the natural part of said word that the shooters appear to have missed. So a murderer who had a lack of understanding of a scientific field...
No, he understood it perfectly. He understood it perfectly, and it was acting consistently with it.
No. Just like you, they couldn't understand that the words natural and artificial are not synonymous. Natural selection resulted in the wolf. Artificial selection resulted in the pug. Please learn English at some point in your life.
Just as Lenin did, Stalin, Mao, and all the rest of them were perfectly consistent. So was Adolf Hitler. And I would encourage you to read Richard Weichert's book, From Darwin to Hitler.
And from my original video, I present this. How willfully ignorant do you have to be as a person to make the leap from evolution via natural selection to eugenics via artificial selection, and claim that they are one and the same? When it came to World War II, we intervened because we were being invaded. The Allies didn't go to war to save the Jews. Hell, the Americans deported Jewish refugees back to Germany, and with the exception of Denmark, occupied nations had a high turn-in rate of Jewish families. To pretend that it was some noble effort on part of the Allies to save the Jews is to bulldoze reality just so you can go to sleep at night. Humanity is not always pleasant, as Christianity proves on a regular basis. I mean, Hitler confided in his generals that he felt bad that, like Moses, he could, quote, only see the promised land from a distance. Even going to the Bible itself, we see such things in Numbers chapter 1, verses 15 through 18. Have you allowed all the women to live? He asked them. They were the ones who followed Balaam's advice and enticed the Israelites to be unfaithful to the Lord in the prayer incident, so that a plague struck the Lord's people. Now kill all the boys and kill every woman who has ever slept with a man, but save for yourselves every girl who has never slept with a man. These were prisoners of war, the surviving Midianites after God had ordered their genocide. These are the apparent actions called upon by your God through Moses, his mouth at that point as his prophet. And how can you say that Hitler's actions were different from all this? He, like Moses, sought a promised land in wiping out what they saw as a diseased thread of humankind. So if you would stop screaming for a moment and watch my video, you'd get everything you have been asking for.
Much like yourself, latched onto a regularly misunderstood phrase. That apparently means we should withhold amoral facts from young people seeking to learn.
My point, sir, Peter, hello, Peter, if you teach people there's no God, that they are evolved pond slime, that they are nothing more than atoms banging around, you don't have a foundation to tell them anything is wrong. Anything. And that's what gave us the 20th century. That's why when Friedrich Nietzsche said that the death of God will lead to the bloodiest century in history, he was right. It did. Atheism, everywhere it's gone, has led to mass murder and the extermination of entire populations, genocide and everything else, totalitarian governments and everything else. 6 minutes and 12 seconds into this video, and someone's ringing the doorbell here at the church, and I've also got some other things I need to do, but I will mark it there and pick up more in another video later. Thanks for watching.
You stopped right before the spot where I brought up Sweden and asked for you to defend your bullshit in light of the existence of such countries which have the highest atheist population of any country in the earth. Universal teaching of evolution, creationism is banned from schools, and yet is about as far from a complete hellhole as you could possibly get. Not to mention that this century hasn't been the bloodiest when you account for population growth. Humankind has become less violent, even though religion has dive-bombed. But of course, that's a fact, and facts, well, they just get in the way of your ignorant ranting. But either way, your arguments, i.e. the original one and the new watered-down version, was refuted by my original response and by what you have already played in this video. You just haven't realised it yet. You're like that one person who calls up tech support and then refuses to do what they tell you to do. I mean, demanding moral answers from an amoral field of science? You're going to have a bad time. So please, check out secular ethics if you are actually interested in learning, which I highly doubt you are. But hang on, what about your second response video?
This will be my last comments regarding Peter Thurston's 48-minute long video, which I have not watched all of it. I just watched a few more minutes of it.
You know what? I'm not going to spend another few hours of my life responding to you prattle out a so-called response to a video you couldn't even be bothered to watch. Yes, my video was long, but that was because I wanted to make damn well sure I'd pin down every single asinine claim you had made. But here, you just revealed your hand. You're not interested in any sort of conversation, but rather you merely want my audience for your monologue. Well, guess what? I won't be sending you easy traffic. I'm removing all links to your videos from my channel, leaving only the names as references. If I'm not going to review something, then I'll simply declare that fact at the start and leave things there, as opposed to spewing out 20 minutes of non-response like yourself. But thank you for displaying the inherent dishonesty found not only in Christian apologetics, but Christianity in general. There are a few things which I'd just like to add here at the end of this video. The first is a massive thank you to everyone who has ever donated to me via Patreon. Your fantastic support has given me the ability to keep this channel going, and I hope to continue producing content in the years to come. Secondly, I would like to thank anyone who has ever interacted with this channel. Your shares, likes and dislikes, as well as your comments of both approval and disapproval, have ensured constant feedback, allowing me to improve my work. Last of all, I would like to express my desire that you treat any of the people displayed throughout the video with respect. Whilst it is true that ideas do not demand respect, and there are many in fact which deserve reprehension, we must be careful on how we tackle said ideas in ensuring we are not simply targeting the person. In short, be the compassionate side of reason. So take care, and I'll see you next time.